Good morning, everybody. On behalf of IIT Mana Bay Area chapter, my name is Narayan, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the chapter as well as the organizing team that has helped us put this event here together. We are a few minutes behind, but that's better than some other events. So I think we will get started anyway right now with our first panel. The panel is the next frontier.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Priya, Sethuraman. I was most recently at Meta. I was running the AI infrastructure PM, TPM organization. We worked on building data, feature engineering, training and inference platforms for all of Meta's internet customers, including ads, newsfeed, and most recently generative AI. I'm really excited to be here and sort of welcome you all to our the first event, IIT Mana event in 3 years. I think when Narayan asked us to all sort of introduce ourselves, he asked us to include a fun fact. So I don't know how fun my fact is. It's more of a FOMO fact. It's that I'm not an IITian myself, but my husband, my uncle, my cousins are all IITian. So I have a lot of long and storied connection with this institution. So happy to be here. Yes, we speak nicknames and we exchange stories from even '69 when my dad graduated. So let me kick this off. So today's panel is about frontier technologies. Some people call it deep tech, next generation tech. So it's about what's going to change the world in the future, right? And for that, we kind of have to start working on it now. We have a bunch of really important and interesting panelists. So I'm going to kick this off by having each of them talk a bit about themselves and also about what they're working on, why that is important and interesting to them. So let's start with Deepak.
Hello everyone. It's a IIT Madras event, I guess. So I finished up in IIT Madras 2003, got my BTech and WE. And one interesting fact is the person sitting on my left, Rahul, actually ragged me. He was 1 year my senior. So as far as my background goes, I'm an inventor by background. Been an inventor on I think 225 issued patents so far. I've done 2 startups. My first startup was acquired by DoorDash. And with that particular startup, I got tired of cooking at home. Started building a robot which made my food. And back then, people thought, hey, you're just wasting your time doing this, doing something fun. But company scaled. We built these robots which made salads for restaurants and cafeterias. And it was finally acquired by DoorDash. And then during the pandemic, I saw my kids struggling with online learning, and I felt, hey, there must be a better way to do online learning than have people teach on Zoom. And so I started thinking of using AI to make the teaching experience better. And started this company called Professor Jim. Right now, what a company can do is you can look at any topic you want to create content on. So let's say you want to create content on IIT Madras, you just type IIT Madras, and our AI can automatically create 20 slides or 40 slides, whatever you want. Slides auto-generated, automatically creates a video where someone can teach it as well. And we're now working with some of the top educational companies in the world to create video content for them. And they're hoping it can make education a lot better and easier. So that's a bit about me.
Rahul.
Sure. Some of you will know me as Rap. I'm Rahul Panicker. And I was Goda 2002, also doubly. I've done a few things. Fun fact, I was paid by Stanford for 4 years to throw parties. I was actually paid. I've done a few things. I said after grad school, I started a company that makes incubators that work without electricity for premature babies. And that has helped over 1,000 babies in over 40 developing countries. Currently being used by babies in the war zone in Ukraine. About maybe 100,000 babies or so in India have already benefited from that. I used to head product at Alphabet's robotics division, Intrinsic. And now I'm actually cooking up my next startup, early days. But basically we're doing AI to automate the chip design process so that we can actually design dramatically better chips.
Hi folks, Rajesh from Khosla Ventures. I'm from class 95 to 99, Mandak. Been chemical engineering, material science, Bell Labs, business school. Been investing in the climate world for about 15 years. I was previously at Applied Ventures, the venture arm of Applied Materials. Khosla Ventures for 3.5 years now. Focus on all our hard tech, deep tech investments. Most of my time is on climate. We'll talk about it, I guess, later. And another 10-15% of my time is on everything related to semiconductors, photonics, for healthcare, and a lot of other verticals. One fun fact I realized, we were an early investor in DoorDash, Khosla Ventures, and we bought 3 of Rahul's companies. It's a small one. IBM is a very powerful network. We should do more of this together.
Hi, I'm Narayan. I run the IBM Research Lab here in Alberton. I'm 1978 metallurgy batch, Godal from IIT. And my early career was in IBM in the East Coast in New York. And then I moved to the Bay Area in 2004, and I've been here since then. And people always ask me, how come you're in the same place for such a long time? And the answer is, in IBM, you never work on anything more than 2 or 3 years. So it's like changing jobs every 3 years. And that's what keeps me kind of going there. The things that I work on now are quantum computing applications, hardware for AI workloads, next generation memory, and how do you accelerate the discovery process for materials and many other applications, right? So accelerating discovery is a big piece of what we do now, and materials for sustainability is the use case for accelerating discovery of materials, right? So those are all some topics that I'm working on currently, and I'm really excited to see what we all learn today. I'm here to learn. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
I guess I have to work on Spike to change his answer next time.
So actually, Rajesh, let's kick off the panel with a question for you, right? Since you're the money guy in the panel today, so can you sort of speak to how the investor community sees frontier technologies as they consider their portfolio of investments? Can you speak a bit to that?
Yeah, sure. Frontier is climate and everything, a lot of other things as well. So we invest in AR, VR, healthcare, robotics, that's where Rahul overlaps, a bunch of other areas as well. So there's certainly more investments going in that space than before. Climate in particular, where I spent a lot of time, it had a long period where, you couldn't go out and say I'm working on climate, and people would say go get a dog. So there was a clean tech 1.0 where a lot of investments went into solar, biofuels, batteries. Kind of those were the 3 major areas everything was investing into. And there is a general sentiment that clean tech 1.0 failed. I don't look at it that way. If you look at solar, it's went from 0 to 800 gigawatts of installation. The costs have come down a lot. Yes, 200 solar companies failed, but as a market, it took off significantly. If you look at batteries, it was pretty much 0 back in 2007, 2008. Now there are 25 million electric vehicles, hybrid EVs, and all that. So it's taken off significantly. Biofuels failed in a big way, but aviation fuels are going to take off. So there's a method to the madness in terms of how that market has gotten in. And speaking of investors now in climate, there's a lot of investments going into things beyond those categories, into steel, concrete, hydrogen, nuclear fusion. We're backing many of those companies. So there's a big momentum behind many of these companies for the right reason. We are like 15, 20 years late into making this really big. So I think there's a lot needs to happen, and we are working with a lot of people coming from the semiconductor world, photonics world, people who have built businesses in other industries, to bring them into the climate industry and make it big. Because guess what, there was nobody working on climate for 10 years, so we can't just be looking at climate entrepreneurs coming back to build climate companies. So a lot of cross-disciplinary talent is extremely critical to make this happen. So we're spending a lot of time in hiring the right people and building these companies, and it has to happen. It's an existential issue. So people recognize that, but it's important to make sure investors are not again tourists, and that's where you need to make sure people are investing in the right companies, you're not working on incremental ideas and so on.
I saw you and Spike sort of geeking out on climate tech just before the panel started. So I think, Spike, you have ideas here. You've been working on this from sort of IBM's research side. So please chime in.
Sure. So the sustainability area obviously is really, really important. And there are many, many facets to it, right? Depending on who you talk to, with what background, they define sustainability in a very, very different way, right? So for us, the focus on sustainability has been the understanding that at the core of some of the key problems in the world, whether it's energy or water or plastics, it's actually constrained by how well you can come up with new materials that have the right properties to do the things that you want done. And the process of inventing materials is incredibly slow today in the world, right? I mean, you look at any material that has made huge impact. I'll give you one example, copper in the semiconductor back end. It took 20 years to go from understanding how to use copper in the semiconductor processing equipment, and then ending up with actually a product that ships with copper in it, right? 20 years. So that's how long it takes to kind of come up with a new material. And if you look at batteries, it took a long time for lithium-ion technology that we have today to go from a lab to actually a product. Almost 15 to 20 years ago. So this 15 to 20 years seems to be kind of a given when we're looking for new challenges to be solved with materials. And so the notion of how do you accelerate this process from 20 years to maybe under 5 is a very pressing problem for the global challenges today. And so that's why I think I'm very interested in seeing how we can use science, specifically computer science and physical science. These two disciplines actually don't talk to each other at all today. So how do you bring these two disciplines together to really do this task of accelerating discovery is something that I'm very interested in, and many of the projects in my area actually are looking into touching these problems in a big way.
Thank you. The next topic actually sort of piggybacks on this. So in this world of instant gratification, right, it's kind of easier to pick a problem and you want to solve it, a technology problem, and solve it via software. But we sort of have this challenge of building for the longer term, which includes sort of an engineering stack that's often hardware which takes more time, more money. We have a couple of folks here who have actually done quite a bit of that as sort of operators and builders. So I'd love for them to speak to that. Maybe start with who has sort of built robots to help us serve food and things like that, and sort of his views on this hardware versus software dichotomy.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about it. I worked on hardware companies as well as software companies now. The hardware company involves spending many 3 a.m. Evenings or nights in China in a factory floor, and a lot of issues with product shipping and replacement and things like that. The software world is a lot less stress, honestly. I get better sleep now. But jokes apart, hardware is tremendously exciting, I think, for the future. If you look over the next 10 or 15 years at what can make a big impact on our lives, we saw the 3D headset released by Apple. You're going to have an Apple product, and you typically, with all these platforms, you have Apple product and you have a non-Apple solution. It looks like Facebook is going to win or Meta is going to win the non-Apple solution with the Quest for this market. If you think about what comes after that, robotics could be pretty interesting, consumer robotics, simply because now with the recent advances in AI, text-to-speech has become almost lifelike. We play a lot with lifelike text-to-speech in our company. Speech-to-text as well, with some of the recent advances with Whisper from OpenAI and others. Even understands my Indian accent very well. So now robots can essentially talk with human-like voices. They can listen. And now with the recent advances in self-driving and stuff, robots can navigate very well. So it's just a matter of time before you have a robot assistant at home. I don't know if it's 6 years or 10 years, but that could be the next frontier where robot assistant at home doing your cleaning and cooking and stuff like that. I don't know who's going to win that platform, but it's probably going to be one Apple. Apple's probably going to win one portion of it, and someone else is going to win the other portion. Then you'll have robots for elder care, you'll have robots for babysitting to make your life easier. So it is a very interesting opportunity. The main question is it a market for a startup or whether it's a big company kind of market? So if you look at the past, you look at all the major hardware platforms that have made a lot of money, like smartwatches, again, one Apple solution and one big non-Apple solution, which is Google with Fitbit. And then before that, the iPhone, it's Apple and Google. So the chances are it's going to be a big company winning these new hardware markets. And in fact, in the last few years, the VC world has seen a major shift. There's a lot fewer VCs investing in hardware right now because there's a lot more risk of a hardware startup going bust than a software startup. So the VC community frowns on hardware. There's a few people who still invest in hardware, but a majority of the VCs think software is eating the world. That's my perspective on hardware at least.
Yeah, thank you for being so candid. Rahul, you want to chime in? I think you've been on both sides of the equation as well here.
Yeah, I've done hardware, medical devices, that makes it especially challenging as hardware. Yes, I've spent evenings waiting for customs clearance of shipments that have come from Indonesia and things like that, various factories. I've done photonic chips, I've done robots. Right? Many of the challenges that Deepak mentioned, they're very real. Right? Often entrepreneurs come in thinking that the way to do hardware, there's many things that transfer over from software to hardware. Right? Many things do, but many important things don't. Right? Fixing a mistake in hardware is not as easy as shipping a bug fix, right, or shipping a patch. It involves expensive recalls. Right? But having said that, I had asked us a question earlier about sort of why did you get into frontier tech? And for me, I would say I grew up watching Star Trek, right? And it's warp drives and tricorders and transporters and things like that. And I would say it's that sort of thing that inspired many of us, was that, and also to build that society of abundance, right? That so better equity and so on. It's that utopia that at some level I would say drives many of us. And I don't think that is possible purely with software. You have to keep babies warm. You have to play in the field of physics. You have to work in the world of atoms. You need clean power. You need solar power. You need to work in the world of atoms. You can't solely work in the realm of bits. So, but the ecosystem has changed enough and technologies have advanced enough that hardware is getting increasingly agile, right? More and more plug-and-play options. The time from design to shipping has come down. So risk has come down. However, yeah, it's significantly greater than software, and which means that the burden on the entrepreneur is significantly higher. You better know what you're getting into.
Yeah, I think that's an important aspect to sort of get. You know what you're getting into, and it's also an ecosystem. I think you touched on this, right? And then that's what you're working on now, automation for chip design, right? Essentially, that would potentially de-risk, the barrier to de-risk chip design and sort of help innovation in that.
I mean, our goal there is where my co-founder he has a paper called From Quips to Chips. Basically, going from natural language to chips. My co-founder is a professor at NYU, and he runs one of the top labs in the world doing AI for chip design. So it's actually so. And if you look at it, virtually, till quantum computers become ubiquitous, virtually all software that has ever been written runs on electronic chips. And even today, much of the design work of these chips hasn't entered the deep learning era. So we hope that we get to a point where building chips can become as easy as today it is to make, say, a website. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, if you had to build a website, you had to do a heck of a lot of stuff. Right?
So essentially, you have to care about the problem and figure out an innovative way to solve it. Not just because it's a hard problem, where probably shouldn't shy away from it. I think Spike, you touched on this as well, right? I mean, you want to bring AI to help science move faster. So essentially, how do you accelerate climate tech using AI, right? I think it's an interesting way to approach it. So I think the next thing that would love to hear your thoughts on are all of these. So these are great technologies, right? And we hope that they are for the benefit of society. But then there's often unintentional harms and hopefully not malicious harm that can be caused by these sort of really powerful technologies. I'd love to hear from you about what are some of the most about some of the things that you are worried about most in terms of safety in this area. Maybe start with you, Spike.
Okay, so a number of things come to mind. The question is how do you prioritize the concerns. So in the area of quantum, I would say it's not really a concern, but I'm concerned about the hype around it. Clearly, quantum has a lot of promise, and I don't know how many of you saw the article in Nature this past Wednesday, and a New York Times article that followed it on some of the advances in the capabilities of a quantum computer to solve a specific physics problem that was called out in the Nature article this week. But that aside, I think we have to kind of sift through the hype and see where the real promise is and which areas the impact will be significant. So we're making a lot of progress. I think there's a lot of promise, but I think we need to be careful where those things are that we need to pick up and move quickly on. Encryption is not one of those, but that's a little bit further out. But there are other areas in chemistry, for example, where you're going to see applications, real applications, useful applications within the next 12 months. In the area of AI, people who work on AI for consumer and AI for enterprise, very different scenarios. And the AI for enterprise, I think, understanding the ethics issues is going to be dominating anything that big companies will try to play. Right? Not having a black box solution is very key for enterprise applications. So, so these two things in the enterprise space are typically, I wouldn't say ignored in the consumer space, but not as important in the consumer space, right? If you look at things like the large language models that we're all kind of inundated with these days, it can be off for many of the consumer applications and we don't care. It can give you an agenda for your application that's slightly different from what others may do. But there's nothing right or wrong about a solution, right? It may be a good solution, but it doesn't have to be the best solution. Well, if you go to the enterprise space, I think that's not an acceptable scenario for an AI solution. It has to be accurate, especially if you're playing in the financial sector or in any other sector where people have to make money. I think having a solution which is a black box, especially in healthcare, for example, if you're looking at cancer diagnosis and your AI engine puts out something that's kind of garbage, I think it's life and death kind of situation. So I think that's why I'm a little bit concerned about the lack of attention to ethics in AI space, and even though there's a lot of articles about it, I don't know how much people are doing about it in that space. And so these deep neural networks and the black box aspect of it, I think there's problems for the healthcare space, for example. So these are two concerns that come to mind. The others are less important than these.
Yeah, thank you, Spike. I think there's been a lot of discussions in the media, and also government is now taking at least they're exploring this space, which I think is important. But then I think there's always a concern from the tech community about whether some of the easiest way to sort of navigate some of these issues is through regulation. And there's an immediate reaction from technologists about whether regulation can slow down innovation. And Rahul, you've actually worked quite a bit in this area. You've written policies in this space. So you want to speak a bit about what worries you and sort of, as an innovator and a policy maker, sort of how we can move the needle here?
Yeah, I do live that schizophrenic life. I am on the steering committee of the Partnership on AI, which is a coalition between all the big tech companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, etc., on what we should do about the evolution of AI. I also helped write India's national AI policy that the NITI Aayog put out in 2018. So these were things that we have studied with, and on the Partnership on AI we continue to. I'll say a few things, right? One, remember, my friend Sethuraman says this, that technology is an amplifier for human intent. Right? With fire, we could cook food, water wild animals, keep warm. We could also set fire to the neighboring village. Right? And now technologies have gotten much more powerful, and so the amplification value, the amplifier gain is much higher now. Gone are the days when technologists could just say, oh, I just built technology, I don't control how it's applied. No, technologists have to take responsibility for the consequences of their creations. And if you ask me what am I most worried about, there's many things as Spike alluded to, but maybe one of the things I'm most worried about is with the advancement of AI, AGI and what will happen and humanity getting wiped out. Maybe closer to what I'm worried about is actually democracy getting subverted, because with increasing automation between the state, capital and labor, the share of labor is dramatically shrinking. And so power will increasingly accumulate with the state and capital. And this is a certain way to subvert democracy, especially in much of the world where the institutions of democracy are not very robust. And so that is something I worry a lot about.
If I may add, one thing we play a lot with is we create computer science courses automatically. So we're now able to do programming assignments and automatically solve them, and all by pressing a button or two. And so it's not too far away where a lot of the low skill, in India for example, every parent is obsessed with teaching their kids software programming in fourth standard or third standard and all. But when I look at all that, I worry, India's got millions of low skill software jobs at Infosys, TCS and Wipro. It's just a few years before a lot of those jobs are going to be automated away with AI. And India's whole economy runs on that. The country needs to figure out policy where, all these software developers are used for other tasks. Otherwise, you're going to see massive job loss. You're going to see society getting disrupted in a big way. We're already seeing for things like writing. AI is doing a pretty good job writing things nowadays. So I have, for example, one of my team members, one of my software team members, he doesn't speak proper English and all, and one day he wrote up this great marketing blog piece. I was like, how do you do it? I didn't know your English was this good, and he said, it's about ChatGPT. So a lot of marketing tasks are getting a lot more productive with things like this. So I think governments need to think about how they're going to handle people's retraining. They're going to think about how to push people into other occupations. India needs to figure out what to do with its millions of low-skill software developers, find new roles for them. So it's going to be very disruptive.
I agree with sort of everyone's views here. I think that the challenges are many. The scary impacts are many. The sort of opportunities are many as well. And it's almost like you sort of can use AI to solve some of the problems that AI introduces. It's an interesting way to think of things. So now let's come back to IIT, right? I think recently IIT director Kamakoti sort of stirred up a hornet's nest by saying that a lot of the sort of the very skilled engineers and talented engineers that work in disciplines such as that are trained in disciplines such as electrical engineering, material science, and sort of and mechanical engineering, they move on to doing something other than their core field of study. So how we do see on this panel like folks who have training in many different fields, but essentially then work on cross-disciplinary efforts to solve like big challenges for the world, such as climate tech or saving babies and serving food. So I'm sure all of you have thoughts about this, right? So maybe I'm going to start with you, Deepak. I think you recently posted about this as well. You seem to be passionate about this. So you want to chime in with your thoughts, and I think all of you actually had ideas about this. So let's go around the panel.
Yeah, I think the role of an engineering education is to just teach people how to approach engineering problems. So at the end of an engineering degree, what I believe a graduate should know is any engineering problem that's given to them, they do some homework on that topic, they learn about that topic, then they figure out solutions and solve them. That's the goal of an engineering education in my mind. And most problems you face in industry are not just pure civil engineering or mechanical engineering or computer science. It's cross-disciplinary. And so I actually believe, and if I look at my own career, right, I got my degree, my PhD in semiconductors, but after that I worked on computer architecture, on material science, on mechanical engineering building robots. Now I work on AI, and the pattern is similar. If whatever problem I face, I spend a little bit of time, maybe sometimes it's a week, sometimes it's 6 months, learning about the topic, and then I get pretty dangerous after that. So in terms of what all this means for IITs, I actually believe the way we educate engineers in IIT right now is not the best way. I believe the right way to do it is, instead of having seven courses every semester, where people teach all these things on a blackboard, I believe the pattern needs to be changed to more project-based learning, where every semester people are given one project they have to do, and maybe 2 or 3 courses max, and people actually work on that project. And when they work on that project, they learn how to work in groups of people. So projects could be things like, build a new smartphone, where you need to apply both mechanical and electrical engineering skills and software as well. Or the project could be something like build a new robot which cleans up your room. And so, those kinds of projects, they help people learn real-world applications of what they do. Then it helps them learn to work with each other. Many IIT folks are not great at working with others. So it helps them communicate as well, because they have to give a project report as well. And these sorts of project-based learning skills are what you need once you start working in a company. When you start working in a company, you don't have someone teaching you on a blackboard. You need to work with others and build projects. That's why the skills you learn in IIT often don't translate that well to the workplace. The person who is first or second in their IIT class doesn't always end up being first or second in the workforce in terms of career success. I do believe education needs to change, and it will be interesting to see if they do it at some point.
I think it's a total waste of resources the way it's being done today, the way it was done before as well. I mean, why should we all do, I mean, we all did 2 years of JEE prep, and now it's probably 3 or 5 years, depending on how long people prep, and then go through 4 more years of, chemical engineering or AND scores or mass transfer, all of that stuff, only to land in software, right? So I think fundamentally the whole engineering structure needs to be revised, but it needs to happen in 2 ways. One is,
The mic should be on. Audio somehow, so you don't.
oh, is that, okay. How many of you are in software, purely software, by the way, here, just show of hands. How many of you in hardware, material science, some element of it, something hardware? Okay, so I have some support. So broadly, but if I look at it, so I graduated in 1999. It was right at the peak of Y2K, right? Year, 2 years before, most of our college mates, we're all looking at the dream job was things like, I don't know if some of you remember, like Britannia, HLL, and stuff like that, ITC, like tobacco company. Why would you ever think of things like that? That's because those were the highest paid jobs. There was so much demand, like a biscuit company. Like I can't think of anybody going and working in a biscuit company now. But suddenly that flipped in 98, 99, right? People are only focusing on Infosys, TCS, and all that stuff. That's because everybody felt like there was a huge opportunity, huge problem, Y2K to be solved, and Jan 2000, the world is going to fall apart kind of a stuff, right? And that drew a lot of IITians into the software world, and it's been a great journey. But there are a lot of other existential issues now, and things are speeding up a lot more in terms of software and hardware coming together. Going back to the last discussion, like many of the battery companies need ML/AI software kind of stuff. So there's significantly more interdisciplinary now that if the school structures it right, giving more options for people to tap the software part of it into the right hardware industries, but also brings a lot of the industries into IIT. I mean, I spent a lot of time with folks at Reliance, Adani, Tata Steel, all of that stuff. They all want to decarbonize the sector in a huge way. Like, they want to build huge renewable energy industry in India. There is a huge opportunity to build semiconductor industry in India. I mean, semiconductors India has been trying for 20 years, may or may not happen. But there is a significant momentum. So you have to tap into that momentum, bring up these controversial questions and see how do we restructure it. So India is not just a software powerhouse, but given the amount of time we spend on learning the hard science, and given how ML and AI are accelerating, like what Spike said, a lot of startups are trying to do that today, right? And that's where, when I said to my first question, would change Spike's answer. It's like if there are startups who are able to tap into talent like that, things can move much, much faster, right? So that's how we need to rethink the whole thing, so we're not just jumping into the next software. I mean, I was looking at the whole YC stuff, when ChatGPT, when OpenAI, by the way, disclaimer, we were, Khosla Ventures was the first institutional investor in OpenAI 5 years ago. We invested $50 million in the company. So when I say the hardware perspective, it's really to combine both software and hardware. It's not, again, what's happening in OpenAI and ChatGPT. But purely from if IIT is only training people for software, I don't think it's the right thing. I was looking at the YC, the latest batch. When ChatGPT announced, OpenAI announced a plugin, 50% of the YC companies made no sense because they are all just putting a wrapper around what GPT 3.5 announced. So there's an element of not jumping from Y2K to enterprise software to the next Bitcoin mining purely based on software, but take the software and how do you think about a lot of verticals and how do you train the students to go after those stuff. That's interdisciplinary is what is most important. Now, he has something controversial.
I think this topic, all of you seem to sort of agree on the interdisciplinary importance, right, of education and training for that. So I do want to come back to some of the core engineering disciplines and the fact that those are important too. I think a number of you actually brought up material science and why that is still important. I know, Spike, if you want to speak to some of these, core disciplines that are for lack of a better word, becoming sexy again because of frontier technologies.
Yeah, sure.
So, may I take a moment here? Priya, in the interest of time, can we get to audience questions?
Absolutely. Yeah, and let's Spike.
Sure, as soon as the Spike finishes. Exactly, yeah.
A short response and then we go to Q&A. So I would say that if you look at any successful product in the marketplace today, is cross-disciplinary, right? But what really happens is that cross-disciplinary training really happens in the workforce. And what you just pointed out, Rajesh, is the education system is still kind of stuck in the old days, right? And if you look at academia, we have a problem that we have to deal with. There's no real good answer. And the problem is, how do you get students trained in different areas without diluting their capabilities in the field of study that they want to do? So, if you want to have a mechanical engineer, you can debate whether you need a mechanical engineer or not, what you need to do. If you cut their education short by 1 year by introducing other courses, then are you really giving them adequate training as a mechanical engineering or not? So this is what the universities are struggling with. And one of the ways in which kind of some campuses are starting to address this problem is not to tamper with the undergraduate education, but at the graduate level, start bringing in interdisciplinary courses in a way that's kind of meaningful. Stanford has just started a sustainability center, massive sustainability center, as you know. And the last time I was in India, about 6 months ago, I spent some time at IIT, and they are starting to talk about a new sustainability center that is going to be very cross-disciplinary. So you're starting to see some good schools address this issue, and the focus is a little bit more on the graduate side than on the undergraduate side. I think that's a nice compromise to have, to kind of start training people to think cross-disciplinary. And when you say cross-disciplinary, it doesn't have to be disparate technologies like electrical engineering and computer science. It could be something much less like chemists and physicists. Even they don't know how to talk to each other, right? So cross-disciplinary doesn't have to be really that far apart. Even seemingly close things are very disparate. So we have a real challenge in terms of training people at the undergraduate and graduate level to actually think about other areas and how to integrate their thinking in a much better way.
Yes, go ahead. We have mics
If you
on
have
both
questions from the audience, we have set up 2 mics on both sides so that everybody can hear. Just line up behind those mics and we'll ping pong on both sides.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
So I grew up here in the U.S., but I spent 3 years in India as a child, and then I spent 10 years in Europe as an adult. And I've seen education systems in U.S., India, and in Europe. And I think it's so amazing the STEM education in India is like, it excels beyond everywhere. I've seen it similar in Europe, that they have amazing STEM education. I think one of the things I saw when I was in India, though, is there's such a lack of diversity in terms of different people, different backgrounds kind of coming together, so that the thought process is sort of challenged, And then when people are here, I'm an executive coach here in the Bay Area, when people are here from the India diaspora in the Bay Area, they struggle many times to be able to relate to people that, So India has such amazing education, it's very well known, it's a brand. Is there some way to sort of do some exchange programs in schools in Europe or schools in the US and bring students over and sort of cross-pollinate things? And then secondary, maybe encourage project-based learning, where there's some sort of competition, every quarter for some sort of entrepreneurship. I've seen that IIT Bombay folks tend to be much more collaborative just because of Bombay's culture is different than the rest of the cities in India. Thank you.
I can take that quickly. So when I was at Apply, we had kind of MOU us on what research can be sponsored, what equipment can be provided, and all that stuff. Some applied folks here as well who can talk more on that. I think IIT Madras, I saw in the last couple of months signing up agreements with CMU and a couple of other universities in terms of how to do semiconductor kind of exchange of knowledge and all that. So a lot of that is starting to happen. Just need to make sure, for lack of a better word, it's not greenwashing and just doing it for the sake of it, but there is real meat behind it, real deliverables behind it. There is a lot of opportunity for sure in doing it the right way.
Maybe I like a couple of things. There's some cultural aspects here. Ultimately, for people to do cross-disciplinary stuff in these environments, you have to provide a certain level of intellectual and emotional safety. So we talk about students having a difficult time working in interdisciplinary areas. Faculty, it's very hard for interdisciplinary areas because if you're a PhD student working at the intersection of disparate areas, which department do you apply to a faculty job? And any one department you apply to looks for depth in that area rather than, or otherwise you get evaluated across departments. So there's sort of many of these systemic challenges also to address in there. But the world is finding ways around this by sort of allowing a certain degree. So when I think I was the first batch at IIM to have the notion of a minor. Right? And so actually we could choose minors in fields very different from ours. And there's actually people who choose the minor in literature, who minor in economics, and so on. Some of these are starting points, but also, like I said, fundamentally what's important is actually providing a sense of safety in taking those non-traditional paths.
So just, I'm happy I'm also happy to share there's a school in France called X, which is like basically like IIT, and they have a national exam. It's the same sort of system, but what they've done now in France is they've combined X with HEC, which is like the MBA school in France, and they put them together. Recently, I was running a program here for them. They're bringing them in patches to Silicon Valley to show them how to drink the Silicon Valley Kool-Aid, and they're encouraging them to create cross-disciplinary startups between engineering and business schools in France. And so they're doing the program in English in France, which is like a big deal. So like they're making all these efforts, and I feel like in India there's some efforts that could also help create more opportunities. So happy to check on those.
Thank you.
I have a little bit of a deliberately provocative statement, right? So, one thing, and I'll start by telling you, when I look at my daughter, we moved her to a project-based learning school, which everybody swears by, Stanford Glory. But then, having to coach her on the mechanics of doing mathematics somewhere else, right? So my own sense is, there is one thing IIT has done very well for me, I think, but needs to be modified. That is, I feel the depth of training we had in math and physics and so on, very few schools get it right at the US, apart from Caltech and MIT and a few others, right? So after the first 20 schools, it's pathetic training, I feel, in universities in the US. So my point here is that I think the depth of training is important in engineering, no matter what else you do later on, because the sheer style of thinking and training your brain for anything else you want to do. However, I think what happens is, we don't absorb it necessarily as students if it's not interesting. So I think by having modules where you teach the intuition of something, and that's it. I think that when I went to IIT, I've come home because you understand why am I doing something. So I think by having modules, by teaching less in each course, but more intensely in a much richer way is how, and then showing how projects so that you can actually put it to use, maybe not immediately but in small ways, and the history of how the idea came up, I think is how you internalize it and you really learn it and you put it to use. And I think IIT, in my view, does it better than most schools. I think only comparable schools are MIT, Caltech, of course they do it better in my view, but same style of teaching. So my thought is, if you had like a co-op program like Waterloo has, so that you're working with industry, but professors and industry folks together designing problems, so that it's not something industry is just using, but you align it with the learning that you're doing, I think that will be much more powerful rather than diluting the fundamental training, I think. I don't think I could have been a professor of engineering, computer science, management, information medicine without the deep training we had in IIT Madras, I think. That's the only thing I want to say.
Can I request the people at the mic to take not more than 30 seconds. Just make your point, ask your question, let them talk, and Priya, if you could have one person, because we got long lines and, okay, just want to be fair to everybody.
Yeah, I can take this one. So it needs to be a combination of project-based learning and real courses. So the ideal course plan in my mind is the first year, maybe just courses to get fundamentals right. And after that, you have one project and 3 courses, 2 or 3 courses. So you need a combination of the fundamentals as well as project-based in my mind.
I'm Jnani Palanikumar. I coach startups. One of the challenges faced by the deep tech companies, especially robotics and material science companies, is bootstrapping at the initial capital, especially for the first-time founders. The question to Rajesh is, what should they do? Right? Unlike software, they need some initial capital because customers are asking for pilots, where investors are looking for validation. So what is our advice you give?
Yeah, so we have invested a lot of 500K checks, $1 million checks, even for very early stage company based on PowerPoint. And the examples are Impossible Foods, nuclear fusion company. If you can take a risk as for putting money into things that are as risky as that, we can invest in a lot. But that said, that's not the natural way. It's not easy to get that money because there are very few VCs actually investing in hard tech. So that's where engaging with things like ARPA-E, DOE, it depends on the sector, right? In the sustainability sector, you have to go get the kind of a funding. There are a lot of early stage angel money that has come in. But the more you are in the university system, working with the national labs, developing some proof points, and continuing to engage with people who are investing a lot in that sector to get the view on what do you need to prove to raise a larger amount of money, even if it's $1 million, $2 million check. That's the only way to do it. There's not a lot of VCs investing in the space.
So equity crowdfunding and crowdfunding has emerged as like the first step for many hardware companies. You see plenty of them out there.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Manish Isanyal, batch of 1970. So the way the government of India spells out how many civil engineers, how many mechanical engineers, how many computer science, they make a matrix and they feed that to the IIT, and that is how the IITs decide the size of each batch. I was on a committee with the directors many years ago, and we did complain about this. But here's the problem for democracy. No matter what you train them in, they will gravitate to the line that pays them the most. The biggest problem I find about the IITs, something about which I gave a talk at the IIT, they do not train them on soft skills. They are all about, be a nerd, go deep into the thing, and that's it. Now, we've started this thing called IIT Startups in 2018, and I did a survey just before we started that, and I found, most of the VCs that I've met ever since we started IIT in 2003, they say, your IIT guys are second to nobody in technology, but when it comes to fundraising, when it comes to marketing, they're kind of lost. So IIT startups, our main goal is to get the guys funded, and I would say we've got a pretty good track record right now. In Silicon Valley, we had 200 plus startups, 120 graduated, 90 got funded, 9 got acquired. So we're on a roll of that front, but then it's mainly because, and I tell IIT that this is great, Narayan did a damn good job. I mean, the crowd we got here, years ago we used to struggle to get this kind of size of crowd. People don't want to.
Munishi, there is a very nice team behind all this effort, and you will see them.
Okay,
I'm saying, but we are blessed to have this kind of presence in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
So thanks to everybody out here.
Networking is somehow not in our DNA, and that's something which IIT has been to understand. Hey, no matter how good you are, unless you have the connectivity, you can't suddenly connect to a guy after 20 years and say, hey, I need some help. He's not going to listen to you. Keep up with him all the time, and this is what I encourage. Thank you.
Can we take 2 more questions from that side, please, in the interest of time? To the next panel that's eager to go.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Pushpendra. I graduated in 2011 and currently working at Google DeepMind as a senior researcher. My question to Rahul and Deepak, I guess, is basically like, before jumping into a venture which is not always necessarily completely in your area of study so far, how do you get the conviction or even the networking or finding a co-founder to go to the next step? So, for example, Rahul, you mentioned that your co-founder is a professor at NYU and you already known him. Did you when you were thinking about it, how did you go do that?
In this particular case, I've known him for 18 years. He was my roommate at Stanford and 2 years my junior at IIM. But I've learned a lot of lessons in finding co-founders. That's a longer conversation. But fundamentally, you need a lot of personal trust, ideally, right? It's something I value a lot, and so you want to build your networks, look within your networks, right? And ideally, someone you've worked with before. But with regard to jumping into a new field and doing something there, you have to ask the question of why. right? And the motivation behind what you're doing. I'll share a bit of advice Mr. Narayan gave me. I once asked him, generally we're having random jam sessions, and I asked him, what do you think is the most important quality of an entrepreneur? What about I'd say the most important quality is courage. Because everyone else's courage comes from the leader's courage. Right? Those people writing you checks, those people quitting jobs to come join you, right? Those customers who are actually early customers who are signing up with you with an untested product. Their courage has to come from you. Right? You are that source. And so you ask yourself, where can I be committed enough so that I can be that source of courage for everyone else that I have taken?
Yeah, you'd asked how you get the courage to, with your current job and strategy one. I guess I have one piece of advice: marry well. If your wife makes plenty of money, you can quit your job and go work on something. Or your husband. I think it applies both for men and women. If the other spouse makes good money, you can afford to give a girl to try something.
I think we have one more question.
Last one.
Yeah, I think he is. Yeah, ready to. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Matthew Partam, BTech 2004 batch mechanical. One statement that Rahul made, that technology is an amplification of human intention. And there is so much of work, money, effort put into solving so many problems. Unless we address that source, human intention, it's not going to work. I wanted to hear something more from the panelists on that one topic, human intention.
Who wants to take this? Yeah, what is your motivation, I guess, towards this intention? Is it what does impact mean to you?
I'll give a short version of it, and I think the audience should hear from others as well. I'll say, very important question that you asked, and so my encouragement is for everyone, do your personal work, right? Work with a qualified therapist. Right? I've benefited from working with multiple therapists since I was a grad student, and I do a lot of trauma healing work. For the last few years, I've been working with Thomas Hübel, who's he's from Austria and does a lot of collective trauma healing work. That shows up in the work. So yes, intention matters. Ultimately, that's what's getting amplified.
Do you want to answer?
I'm not quite sure how I would answer that question, but I think intention depends a lot on where you are in your career, early career, mid-career, or late career. So I think all of those things play a very important role in how you can decide at any one point in time where you want to go from where you are. So I think there's no one right answer. I think it all depends on your life experiences and learning and where you want to end up.
Thank you, Priya, Deepak, Rahul, Rajesh.